If you struggle with a lot of tennis injuries, especially if you get injuries in lots of different places, then this video could be really helpful for you, because I want to talk to you about the connection between nutrition and food and injuries. This is something that not many people talk about, so hopefully this is going to be very beneficial to you. If it is, really appreciate it if you could give me a thumbs up, and if you enjoy this type of content, really appreciate it if you could subscribe to my channel as well. Our bodies are very resilient. They have an incredible capacity to handle the stresses and strains that we put them under. So although tennis is a demanding sport, if you're constantly getting injured, you're constantly dealing with pain, it tells you that maybe something else is going on underneath that's contributing to the problem. So what I want to start by doing is firstly explaining the difference between pain and injury, because that's going to be a really important distinction. Then I'm going to go on and talk in a little bit more detail about the role of nutrition and inflammation within both pain and injuries. So pain and injury are different. An injury is when you damage some kind of tissue. Maybe you tear a muscle, or you strain a tendon, or you strain a ligament or something like that. Actual tissue damage. That's very different to pain. Pain is a protective mechanism created by the brain to protect you, to warn you, to tell you that something is either going wrong or something might go wrong. So it's designed to get you to change your behavior. When you experience pain, it absolutely does not mean you have some kind of injury where tissue is damaged. Obviously, a lot of the time when you injure yourself, you do experience pain. I've broken my leg playing soccer, snapped it in half. Definitely hurt, and it was definitely a real injury. So it can happen and does happen often, but you can have excruciating pain without any tissue damage whatsoever. So they're kind of separate things, and it's important that you understand that. So what I want to do to start with is kind of talk about the role of nutrition and inflammation in pain, and then we're going to talk about how it can actually increase the likelihood of tissue damage injuries as well. Now that you understand the difference between pain and injury, let's talk about how nutrition and inflammation can influence pain, because a lot of the time players, they experience pain on court. It's not actually an injury, there's no tissue damage, it's just the brain trying to protect them, and the question is, what's it trying to protect them about? Now realistically, there can be a lot of different things that might be going on, but here we're focusing on the role of inflammation. Inflammation has an effect on something called a nociceptor. So a nociceptor is a type of receptor that detects movement, mechanical stimulation in the body. Some people wrongly call them pain receptors. There's no such thing as a pain receptor. It's pretty clear in the research. We have nociceptors that send information back to our brain about potentially threatening types of movement. And then it's up to our brain, based on a whole bunch of other stuff, to decide whether it wants to create pain to protect us or not. Because all day, every day, these nociceptors are sending threat information back to our brain. When you walk, you've got threat information coming back from your knee, going to your brain to make sure that you don't dislocate your own knee. And normally when you're walking, you don't get pain in the knee. But if you land funny and you start to twist your knee a little bit too far, we increase the activity in the nociceptors, that goes back, and then you might experience pain because of that additional stimulation. So nociceptors are threat receptors. How inflammation relates to this is inflammation cranks up the volume on threat receptors. So it basically gets the threat receptors sending more information back to the brain all day, every day, and when that happens, you're more likely to experience pain. Now, inflammation itself is not a problem. That's also a normal process and thing that occurs in the body. It's your immune system's way of trying to protect you. So inflammation is basically the immune system doing its job, releasing chemicals, because if you're dealing with some kind of bacteria, your immune system needs to try and kill that bacteria. If you roll your ankle, you damage some ligaments in the ankle, so if there's an actual amount of tissue damage, your immune system actually needs to remove the damaged cells so you can start laying down new cells. Well, if you've ever rolled your ankle, you understand that it really, really hurts, and that is because of what we're talking about here, the inflammation cranking up the volume on the threat receptors. But what you'll probably also have experienced is when the swelling starts to go down, your ankle stops hurting, and that normally takes 1 to 2 weeks, but ankle ligaments can take 3 to 6 months to heal. So the inflammation is one of the big drivers of pain that people experience. But that's kind of an acute situation. What I'm talking about here is chronic inflammation, inflammation that's going on all day, every day. This can come from a number of places, but one of the major places that inflammation comes from is our digestive system. And again, there can be a number of different underlying causes of, digestive system inflammation, but one of the main ones is going to be the nutrition that you eat. So if you are dealing with a lot of pain on court, you might potentially need to modify the type of nutrition that you're eating, because if you're eating very inflammatory foods, it's going to create digestive inflammation, which can then get into the rest of the body, become systemic inflammation, and that inflammation floats around all of your joints every day, cranking up the volume on these threat receptors, causing you to experience pain. And if this inflammation gets into kind of the nerves and the nervous system, then you can get nerve type pain because of inflammation. So it's kind of a really important piece of the puzzle, and I'm going to talk about the types of food that can potentially cause inflammation towards the end of the video. Now we need to add in an additional layer of how inflammation can contribute to pain, because it's not just about the cranking up the volume of these threat receptors. There's an additional piece of the puzzle. When our digestive systems become inflamed, they are directly connected to our brain via something called the vagal nerve. And often when the digestive system becomes inflamed, the brain can also become inflamed, and it works both ways. They both tend to drive inflammation in each other. Now, in addition to cranking up volume on threat receptors, inflammation prevents cells from producing energy properly. And if the cells within different parts of the brain don't produce energy properly, they can't perform their functions properly. Now, we've got several different areas of the brain that are important for regulating pain. Their job is to filter out threat information that we don't need to pay attention to because it's not relevant at this time. Well, if those areas that help to regulate pain and threat information aren't working properly because they're inflamed, they don't filter out threat inflammation, and you're more likely to experience pain. So it's really kind of a double whammy, because we've got the cranking up of volume on the threat receptors and potentially the areas that regulate threat not working, doubling up the likelihood that inflammation can contribute to the pain that you experience when you play tennis. And then the last thing we need to talk about before we go over the actual nutrition is how inflammation can contribute to actual tissue injuries, because sometimes people do strain and tear muscles and have other injuries. And what this comes down to relates back to what we just said then about parts of the brain becoming inflamed, because a lot of tissue injuries are actually as a result of poor coordination. If we use the hamstring as an example, it's a frequently injured muscle in tennis. Most people think they injure the hamstrings because the hamstrings aren't flexible enough, but that isn't necessarily true. Our muscles are ridiculously flexible if our nervous system allows them to relax, but that requires good coordination. When the parts of the brain that are responsible for coordination aren't quite doing what they should do, they can hold inappropriate tension in muscles at the wrong time, and that's when they're liable to strain and become injured. And as we just talked about, that can relate back to poor nutritional choices, creating inflammation in the digestive system, creating inflammation in the brain. So now we need to look at what nutrition can potentially be a problem. When it comes to the nutrition, unfortunately, it's not a simple answer, because people are different. They have different genetics, different immune systems, different digestive systems, and different nervous systems. So it's about finding what works for you. Some foods that are completely fine for a lot of people create a whole bunch of inflammation in me. So what I do is eat the nutrition that allows me to function at my highest possible level. So people are very different, and I'm going to give you a way to think about things. The first thing that I would look at removing is junk food. If you're eating processed crappy foods, then you want to take them out because they're not very healthy. If you want to improve your tennis and not have injuries, then don't eat junk food. Sweet, candy, cakes, donuts, whatever it is, it's probably something that you want to shelf. So that's the first thing that I would think about removing. The next thing I would think about removing would be gluten. Now, gluten is a problem for a lot of people, not for everyone. Some people can handle gluten just fine. No one's digestive systems contain the enzymes to fully break down gluten. That one's been proven by research, but some people, they can handle it just fine without any ill effects whatsoever. And then at the opposite end, we've got people that have celiac disease and non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which is where I think Djokovic fits in. Now for me, I do really badly on gluten, so I don't eat it. Djokovic does really badly on gluten, he doesn't eat it. But it's up to you to decide whether that's something you want to do. But just in terms of the research, in terms of foods that we know drive a lot of inflammation, that would generally be the next one that would warrant removing. And it's found in wheat, rye, barley, and a whole bunch of other stuff. They sneak it in everywhere. The next thing that you might want to consider removing is dairy. Dairy can create a lot of immune reactions for a lot of people. We've got lactose intolerance, which is one thing. That's a lack of an enzyme and lack of ability to digest the sugar in it. But then the proteins within milk, so whey and casein, can also create inflammation within a lot of people. And often when people don't do well with gluten, they also don't do well with dairy, but some people can handle it. So if you're thinking processed foods, then we've got gluten, then we've got dairy. Next, we've got potentially legumes. So a lot of people do okay on legumes. I think Djokovic, as far as I know, he eats a lot of that, so he does okay with legumes. Things like chickpeas and lentils. I personally don't do too well with legumes, so I don't eat them, but you may be completely fine with them, or you may not. Next, we can start to think about corn, or potentially we could have had corn before we went to legumes. You know, it's a judgment call at a certain point. A lot of people react to corn, so that could be something you could look into. And then we've got other grains. So we've got non-wheat related grains. So here we've got things like rice, and we could include quinoa. So various other grains. Again, some people can handle them completely fine. Other people really can't handle them well, but that could be the next thing that someone might need to address. Then after that, some people can't handle nuts. Some people can't handle nightshades, so tomatoes and peppers and potatoes, but I find not many people need to get to that point. Most people, it kind of happens further on, but that's the way that I would kind of think about things, removing them in that order. What I generally eat, and this is just what works for me, is you want to think about just paleo nutrition. I eat meats, I eat nuts, I would eat fish if I like the taste of fish, but I don't, so I don't eat it. I eat lots of fruit, I eat vegetables, and I eat lots of root vegetables. So I get most of my carbohydrates from potatoes, sweet potatoes, yams, different types of root vegetables, and from fruits. And I'm a 200-pound guy that plays a lot of tennis, and I can easily get enough energy from those sources to help me play and train a lot. But that's the way that you want to think about things in nutrition. It literally is a case of running a test on your body to see how your body responds. There is no one size fits all, but because of the reasons that I've outlined, inflammation can create a lot of problems with pain for players on court, and it can create a lot of injuries because of the coordination that gets affected. However your body responds to the food that you eat is how it responds. If you choose to eat foods that drive inflammation, then there are ramifications to that. But it's not my job to tell you what to eat. I'm just helping you to understand how things can fit together and giving you a way to kind of think about nutrition a little bit. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of resources available for free on the internet that can help you dive deeper into the types of food that cause inflammation. So that could be something you definitely want to check out. But I hope you've found this video beneficial. If you did, leave me a comment down below and let me know. If you've got any questions about this, let me know, and I'll catch you next time.